What happens when one of the most beloved musicians in history sits down for what should have been a relaxed morning interview, only to be met with hostility so sharp it leaves the entire studio stunned? It took less than 40 seconds, 39 to be exact, for a television host to sabotage her own credibility and push a global icon to the brink of walking off her set in disbelief. That morning, the studio lights glowed warmly, casting a familiar shine across the stage as Paul McCartney entered. He wore the same gentle, charismatic smile that had charmed millions for generations. He was there to discuss his newest project, a heartfelt documentary chronicling his decades-long musical journey. It was meant to be an uplifting conversation, light, nostalgic, celebratory. Across from him sat Lorraine Kelly, poised in her chair, with her notes neatly arranged on the small coffee table between them. As the cameras rolled, everything seemed typical of a morning show. Polite introductions, cheerful energy, and an air of professional friendliness. "Paul, welcome to the show," Lorraine said brightly, her tone rehearsed to the precision expected of a daytime host. "Thank you for having me," Paul replied warmly as he settled into his chair. "It's lovely to be here. So let's talk about this new documentary of yours. You've had quite the career, haven't you? Though I'd have to say some people might wonder if you're just trying to stay relevant at this point." The shift was immediate. Paul's smile wavered for half a second before he regained his composure. "Well, I suppose I'm just doing what I've always done, making music and sharing it with people who want to listen." Lorraine leaned back, crossing her legs, the atmosphere tightening around her. "Right, but you're, well into your 80s now? Don't you think it's time to let the younger generation have their moment? I mean, how many times can you tour the same music?" A ripple of discomfort moved through the audience. This was not the warm, respectful conversation they had expected. Paul remained steady, though his jaw tightened. "I tour because people still want to hear the music. The shows sell out. Fans from all generations come together. That's something special." "Sell out? Come on now, let's be honest. People show up for nostalgia, not because you're doing anything new. You've been riding the coattails of the Beatles for 60 years? Paul inhaled slowly. "The Beatles were a collaboration. What we created together was special. But I've also had a successful solo career, worked with Wings, experimented with different genres. I've never stopped creating." Lorraine let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "A successful solo career? That's generous. Without John Lennon, would anyone really care what you were doing? Let's be real, he was the true genius. You were just a pretty face with a bass guitar, and not even a great bassist, if we're being honest." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Crew members exchanged shocked glances. This was no longer tough interviewing. This was calculated disrespect. Paul sat up straighter, his voice now cool and controlled. "I think you are being incredibly disrespectful, not only to me, but to the legacy of the band and to John's memory." "Disrespect?" Lorraine snorted. "I'm just asking the questions everyone's thinking. You've made millions, probably billions, from songs you wrote as a kid. Now you're just an old man clinging to past glory. Don't you have any shame about that?" "Shame," Paul repeated softly. "I'm proud of everything I've accomplished. I've worked hard my whole life, and I've never taken for granted the connection I have with people through music." "But that's the point," Lorraine pressed, leaning forward with a cold smile. "You haven't really worked. You stumbled into success as a teenager, everything handed to you.
And now you just sit back and collect checks from old songs. Real artists evolved. They grow. They challenge themselves.
You just play yesterday for the millionth time and call it a career. The line echoed across the studio like a slap. Paul's fingers tightened around the armrests of his chair. For the first time during the interview, he didn't bother hiding his frustration. I've written hundreds of songs. I've explored classical music, electronic music, worked with artists across countless genres. If you'd done even basic research, you'd know that. Lorraine smirked, her expression dripping with smug satisfaction. Oh, I did my research, Paul. I know all about your little vanity projects, the classical albums nobody listened to, the experimental pieces that went nowhere. It all just reeks of desperation, doesn't it? Trying to prove you're more than the guy who got lucky in a band 60 years ago. Lucky? Paul's voice rose, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. You think it was luck? We practiced for hours every day. We played tiny clubs in Hamburg until our hands were numb. We earned every bit of success we had. Luck had nothing to do with it. Sure, Lorraine muttered, examining her nails as if bored by his defense. Then she looked up with a predatory glint. But let's talk about your personal life, shall we? 3 marriages? 4? Honestly, I've lost track. Doesn't exactly scream good judgment, does it? A flush crept up Paul's neck. My personal relationships are none of your business, he said tightly, and they have absolutely nothing to do with why I'm here today. Everything's my business when you sit in that chair. You're a public figure, a commodity, and the public deserves to know that behind all your nice guy charm, you're just another celebrity who can't keep a marriage together. He exhaled slowly, fighting to keep his composure. I've loved and lost like many people. I've also found happiness. But again, this has nothing to do with the documentary. Lorraine responded with her signature cutting laugh. The documentary, right? A vanity project where you rewrite history and make yourself the hero of every story. Tell me, did you pay people to say nice things about you? Because I genuinely can't imagine anyone believing you're as important as you seem to think you are. That was the breaking point. Paul rose abruptly from his chair, the microphone pack catching slightly on his jacket. I've had enough, he said, his voice full of tightly controlled fury. I've came here for a professional interview, not to be insulted and attacked. Oh, sit down, Lorraine scoffed. Don't be such a baby. Can't handle a few tough questions? That's pathetic. These aren't tough questions, Paul replied, his voice trembling, though not with fear, with anger. This is cruelty dressed up as journalism. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in tearing someone down for ratings. Lorraine stood as well, her expression twisting with indignation. How dare you question my journalistic integrity? I've been doing this for years. I've interviewed prime ministers, movie stars, actual important people. You're just the has-been musician who should be grateful I even agreed to have you on my show. Grateful? Paul repeated incredulously. You should be grateful. I've spent decades bringing joy to millions. I've contributed to art, to culture, to unity. What have you done but sit in a chair and belittle your guests? By now, the entire crew had stopped pretending to work. Cameras hung idle. Boom mics hovered mid-air. Everyone watched in frozen silence. Lorraine's face turned beet red. "Get out!" she snapped. "Get out of my studio right now!" "I'm already leaving," Paul said. He tore off his microphone pack and placed it firmly on the chair. "I won't subject myself to this kind of treatment. I've faced real challenges, real hardships, and I won't let you speak to me as if I'm nothing." "You are nothing without the Beatles," Lorraine screamed after him. "A footnote pretending to be a legend." Paul stopped at the edge of the set. Slowly, he turned back. "You know what the saddest part is," he said softly. "You could have had a lovely conversation. You could have asked about the stories behind the songs, the incredible people I've worked with, the journey this documentary celebrates. But instead, you chose to be small and mean-spirited. That says everything about you and nothing about me." "Don't you dare lecture me," Lorraine barked. "I built this show from nothing. I earned my place here." "And you've just thrown it all away," Paul replied quietly, "because this, right here, is what people will remember."
Not your years of work, not your other interviews. This is what people will remember, the moment you forgot basic human decency. Lorraine's arm snapped across her chest. "Please, the public will side with me. They'll see you for what you are, an entitled celebrity who walks off the moment things get a little challenging." "Challenging?" Paul shook his head slowly, disbelief etched across his face. "You called my life's work worthless. You mocked my marriages, my age, my talent, everything I've dedicated my life to. You show nothing but contempt since the moment I sat down. If you think that's challenging journalism, then you're deluded." "Security." Lorraine barked towards someone off camera. "Escort this man out." "I'm going," Paul said, his tone calm but resolute. "I don't need an escort. I know my way out." He paused, turning back for one final look at her. "I genuinely hope you reflect on what happened here today, because you've hurt yourself far more than you could ever hurt me." With that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow the air itself. Lorraine remained frozen in place, breath heaving, clearly expecting someone, anyone, to jump to her defense. "Well," she demanded at the quiet room, "what are you all staring at? Get back to work. We need to film the segment." But no one moved. The producer, an experienced woman in her 50s with decades of television under her belt, finally stepped forward. Her voice was even, but the disappointment in her eyes was unmistakable. "Lorraine, that was completely out of line." "Out of line? I was doing my job, asking the hard questions nobody else has the courage to ask." "You were bullying a guest," the producer said flatly. "There's a difference between tough questioning and personal attacks. You crossed that line about 5 minutes into the interview." "He's a public figure," she insisted. "He can handle it." "Being a public figure doesn't mean someone forfeits basic respect." "And even if it did, what you said wasn't journalism," the producer replied. "It was just mean." Lorraine scanned the room, searching for an ally. "Someone agree with me. I can't be the only one who thinks Paul McCartney is overrated." Silence. Finally, one of the cameramen spoke quietly, but with conviction. "My mom loves Paul McCartney. She's going to be devastated when she hears about this." "Oh, for heaven's sake, it's just Paul McCartney. There are plenty of musicians in the world." "Not like him," the cameraman replied. "He's special, and you treated him like garbage." Lorraine spun toward the producer. "Well, are we airing this or not?" Producer was already on her phone. "I'm talking to the network now," she paused, then looked directly at Lorraine. "But I'll be honest with you, this is bad. Really bad." "It's just one interview," Lorraine said, though the confidence was slipping from her voice. "You called Paul McCartney talentless," she read. "You mocked his marriages, his age, and said he only mattered because of John Lennon. Do you honestly think that will blow over?" For the first time, fear flickered behind her eyes. I was just trying to make good television. People like drama." "There's drama, and then there's watching someone be unnecessarily cruel to a beloved figure. You've been doing this long enough to know the difference." Lorraine sank into her chair, the weight of her mistake pressing hard. "He provoked me," she insisted weakly. "Did you see the way he was looking at me?" "He looked at you like someone who couldn't believe what he was hearing, and honestly, neither could I." "What were you thinking?" "I thought," she hesitated, "I thought it would make me look tough, like a real journalist who doesn't coddle celebrities." "You look like a bully," the producer said bluntly. "And the network is already getting calls. Someone in the audience must have tweeted about it." Lorraine's hands trembled. "What kind of calls?" "Complaints. A lot of them. And that's only from the people in the live audience." The phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. "We're pulling the segment," she announced. "It won't air." "You can't do that!" Lorraine cried. "That's my show." "I miss the network's reputation, and right now they're trying to save it from you."
They're not going to broadcast footage of you attacking Paul McCartney, the producer said firmly. The backlash would be enormous. Lorraine pushed up from her chair for the second time, anxiety replacing the confidence she had walked in with earlier that morning. She began pacing across the studio floor, heels clicking like a metronome of growing panic. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I've had controversial interviews before. Nobody's ever made this big a deal about it." "That's because those interviews were with people who actually deserved tough questioning," the producer shot back, her tone sharper than Lorraine had ever heard. "Politicians caught up in scandals, celebrities facing real accusations. But Paul McCartney came here to talk about a documentary celebrating his music career. There was no scandal, no controversy, nothing that justified what you did." Lorraine stopped pacing. Her shoulders sagged, and her voice shrank into something small and almost childlike. "So, what happens now?" The producer glanced down at her phone as another message came through. Her expression tightened. "The network wants to see you immediately." Lorraine felt the floor drop out beneath her. "They're going to fire me, aren't they?" "I don't know, but I wouldn't want to be in your position right now." After a pause, she added, softer, "For what it's worth, you're a talented broadcaster. You've done exceptional work over the years, but today, you forgot the most basic rule of interviewing. Treat your guests with respect, especially when you're asking tough questions." Lorraine swallowed hard. "I just wanted to be memorable." "Well," said the producer, "you succeeded, just not in the way you intended." Around them, the studio was emptying out. Crew members packed up equipment with quiet efficiency, each one avoiding Lorraine's gaze as if looking at her might pull them into the fallout. Lorraine stood frozen in the center of the set, the glaring studio lights still shining on her like she was the final performer in a tragic play. The empty chair where Paul McCartney had sat minutes earlier seemed to glow with accusation. This was supposed to be a good day, a big day. But it wasn't. Today would be remembered as the day Lorraine Kelly let her ego overshadow her skill. The day she mistook cruelty for boldness. And the day she crossed the line she could no longer defend. As she walked slowly toward the exit to face the executives, she replayed the entire interview in her mind. Every harsh question, every moment she had doubled down instead of stepping back. Too late now. Far too late. Across the building, Paul McCartney had already been escorted out by staff members who looked genuinely heartbroken about how things had unfolded. Many had grown up listening to him. Some even called him a hero. They offered him water, a quiet room, anything he needed to breathe and recover.
Paul thanked them gently but declined. Kindness was the last thing he wanted to burden anyone with. He simply slipped into the back seat of his car. As the vehicle merged into London traffic, Paul stared out the window at the city he'd known for most of his life. He didn't feel angry, just tired. Tired of the idea that even after decades of music, accomplishments, and goodwill, there are still people who felt the need to provoke or diminish him for attention. But beneath that weariness, there was also relief. Relief that he had stood up for himself instead of quietly absorbing the hostility. Relief that he recognized when an interview had turned into an ambush and chose to walk away with dignity intact. His phone buzzed with messages from his manager, his publicist, and friends who had somehow already heard whispers of what happened. The story was spreading fast, but Paul wasn't worried. He knew the truth, and he knew anyone who eventually saw the footage would too. "You all right, Paul?" asked the driver, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. Paul managed a small smile. "Yeah, just another day in the life." The driver chuckled. "My sister works at the studio. She said you were a complete gentleman." "I tried, though I might have lost my temper a bit toward the end." "Sounds like she deserved it, sir." Paul didn't answer. Criticizing Lorraine wasn't in his nature. Instead, he thought about the documentary, the celebration of art, music, joy. That was what mattered. Not one disastrous interview. Back at the studio, Lorraine sat across from 3 network executives, all of them wearing grim, unreadable expressions. And she knew, before anyone said a word, that the consequences had finally arrived.
"Do you understand the gravity of what happened today?" one of the executives asked, his tone devoid of sympathy. Lorraine nodded, all the defiance she'd carried into the room gone. Her shoulders curled inward, and her voice trembled. "I do. I made a mistake." "A mistake," another executive repeated with disbelief. "You verbally attacked one of the most beloved musicians alive on live television. Our phones haven't stopped ringing. Social media is in flames. Public relations is already labeling this a crisis. This isn't just a mistake, Lorraine. This is a disaster." "I know. I don't know what came over me. I just kept pushing, and I couldn't seem to stop myself." The third executive leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Then we need to know why. Why Paul McCartney? Why today? What were you hoping to achieve?" Lorraine stared down at the table, unable to meet their eyes. She searched herself for an answer, one honest enough to matter. "I think I wanted to prove I was still relevant, that I could create moments people would talk about, but I went about it in the worst possible way." "Yes," the first executive said bluntly, "you did, and now we have to decide what to do next." The room sank into a heavy silence. Lorraine felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but blinked them away. She had made this mess. She had crossed a line. The least she could do was face the consequences without falling apart. "We're suspending the show," the second executive said at last. The words crashed over her. Still, she forced herself to nod. "We need time to assess the damage. Time to determine whether there is anything left to salvage, and if so, how." "And me?" Lorraine asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. "We'll be in touch," the third executive said, corporate language for, "Your career here is over. We just haven't written the paperwork yet." Lorraine rose on unsteady legs. "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry. Not just for the damage to the network, but for how I treated Mr. McCartney. He deserved better." None of the executives replied. Their silence was final. Lorraine left the room and walked down the familiar hallways of the building she had worked in for years. Posters of past interviews lined the walls, moments that she had once taken pride in. Now they felt like ghosts watching her fall apart. She stepped outside into the afternoon sun, feeling numb, as if the world around her were moving, but she wasn't. How had everything gone so wrong? It hadn't happened in a single moment. She realized it had been building for months, maybe years. The pressure to stay relevant, the fear of fading into the background, the misguided belief that aggression equaled assertiveness.
She'd allowed her insecurities to shape her behavior, and now the consequences were unavoidable. Across town, Paul McCartney sat in his home studio with the guitar resting comfortably in his hands. Music had always been his refuge, his way of untangling the noise of the world. His fingers drifted across the strings, forming familiar chords, and soon a gentle melody filled the room. He wasn't thinking about the interview. He wasn't thinking about Lorraine Kelly at all. He simply let the music move through him the way it always had. This is who he was. Not a target of someone's frustration, not a relic of past fame, but a musician who had spent his life creating beauty and sharing it with millions. That was his legacy. That was what mattered, and nothing, not one hostile interview, not one person's bad day could tarnish that. As evening settled over London, two very different people reflected on the same event from opposite emotional worlds. One had walked away from cruelty with dignity intact. The other had surrendered to her worst impulses and lost nearly everything she had worked for in 39 reckless seconds. It was a lesson as old as time. Words have power, and cruelty wounds not only the person receiving it, but often the one delivering it. Lorraine Kelly had learned that lesson publicly, painfully, and with no way to undo what she'd said. All she could do now was face the consequences and hope that someday she might reclaim even a fraction of the respect she had thrown away. But Paul McCartney didn't need her apology. He had his music, his family, his fans, and a lifetime of achievements that no single interview could diminish. He had weathered storms far harsher than this one, and he would weather this too. And tomorrow he would do what he had always done. Pick up his guitar, create something new, and carry on. An artist, a legend, and a man who knew exactly who he was.